Hello, I want to welcome you to the second in a series of town halls for Kat Stone for state senator in Oregon. My name is Betsy Cunningham and I am the facilitator of this meeting. If you are listening live through Zoom, you can participate, ask live questions or ask questions via the chat. You can also type in questions if you're watching it via live via Facebook. So today's subject is the restoring the health of our communities and the timber severance tax. So Kat, you can let you go ahead.
Hi there, I'm Kat Stone, and I am a 65-year-old registered nurse, former mill worker, who is running for State Senate District 1. And I am running because I found out in the last 2 or 3 years about what really happened in the 90s. When everybody thought it was about the bird, it wasn't about the bird. Only 25% of the income lost to communities was from the bird. 75%, 3 times as much money was lost because private timber quit paying their fair share. Private timber used to produce income for counties by paying property tax. And in 1990s, they got their property tax reduced 95%. They used to pay a Harvest Severance preference or privilege tax. And that is a tax that corporations pay in order to operate in your community. California has a 3.5% Harvest Severance tax. Idaho has a 3.5% harvest tax. And Washington has a 5% harvest tax. And they operate that on an 80-20 basis. That is 20% of the harvest severance goes back to the state and 80% goes back to the communities where the logs were cut. So in 1990, Oregon had a 6.5% harvest severance privilege tax. And the timber companies paid it. And I lived during the 70s, and I know the difference between our public safety services, our mental health services. The things that have changed in that time since the 90s. So what I would propose is that we reinstate harvest severance in Oregon. It is really counterproductive to the citizens when the state is going broke, can't pay its PERS, and we have given these people free ride. I'd like to talk a little bit about the map behind me. And this is forest ownership in Western Oregon. And down here at the bottom, we do not have Curry County or Josephine County or Jackson County. But all the red areas are owned by foreign investors. Land that used to be public was given to settlers, and settlers sold it to mills and private timber companies. And they eventually incorporated themselves so that they're no longer family-run entities. Weyerhaeuser has a small section that is family-run that has a mill. But none of these other red lands own mills. They don't have employees. They don't really provide jobs. They have a contract with a feller buncher who goes in to clear cut a piece of land. And then there are the truck drivers that deliver the logs, mostly to the coast to be shipped overseas. These companies in the red are called TIMOs and REITs, Timber Industry Management Organization and Real Estate Investment Trusts. And because of their corporate structure, they pay out 90% of their profits every year to their shareholders. Those shareholders don't live here. Those board members don't live here. And they don't pay federal tax and they don't pay state tax because Oregon follows federal tax laws. So if these people are getting a free ride, that means that you pay more in property taxes, you pay more in fees for county services, and you're just going broke. They're passing, the 1% is passing the buck to the poorest of the people. And in Southwestern Oregon, global isn't working for us. Global isn't working. We need to stop shipping the trees from these lands overseas. We need to keep our sticks here and manufacture here. And so I would propose that we reinstate Harvest Severance. And I am not the only one who feels that way. There are several different groups working on this, and there are 3 different bills being constructed now. But we really need to take care of the people, of the working people, of the starving people, of the people that really got the short end of the stick in the 1990s when they decided to cut Harvest Severance and property taxes. Did the citizens here ever get a 95% reduction in their property taxes? No. And because of this corporate welfare, our taxes and fees increase. Are there any questions? Or comments or rude remarks?
Or not so rude remarks, but I don't see anything. I don't know if there's any from the Facebook.
Anybody can raise their hand if they want to ask a question. Well, that'll make it a pretty short meeting today.
Well, can you expand upon some of the ideas of legislation that is coming up?
Not really. We're going to have a Zoom on the 21st with, I think it's Fair Taxes Oregon, that will explore further what is in the bills. And if they change every day because there is a lot of negotiation going on over how it will be administered. I can talk about how private timber, and they call it forestry, but it isn't forestry. It's plantationry. It is tree farming. It is not a forest. And the difference between a regular forest is that it has a base layer with moss and ferns and soil that is wet. And in a plantation, everything is dead. All the trees are the same age. And many people don't know that a Douglas fir tree actually has stages of maturity. And for the first 80 years that a Douglas fir grows, it cannot shut off its water siphon. So it sucks the land dry. And when we have acres and acres and acres of dry land with these young trees that are full of pitch, when they catch fire, they burn much hotter than a forest fire in the old days. Our forests in Oregon were fire hardened, and the plantations are not fire hardened. So when we only allow a tree to go 40 years, we are just sucking the water out of the land. And the fire in Eugene, that was east of Eugene, that could be called the Weyerhaeuser fire, because almost 70% of the trees that burned were Weyerhaeuser plantation. And they can destroy an actual forest. If you look at this map up close, it shows that the ONC lands are very red. And that was surprising to me. I thought that the ONC lands were more public lands. So I need to delve deeper into that question. And I'm talking with my experts as often as I can to keep updated.
Okay, from Beth, where can I find more information about this?
Beth, if you can log into catherinestone.com, we can definitely hook you up with some more information. There is some information on a group called the Coast Range Association. That's where this map comes from. This took years of data collection and digging through old records to find out who owns what. And that's why we don't have the southern part of the state, is because those numbers are still in process. But if you contact me, I can put you in contact with the people who are meeting on the 21st for a Zoom meeting. It's at 6 o'clock in the evening, and I think you'll find it very informative. I would recommend that everybody join.
Okay.
Yes, Jim.
I know that you've said that the big companies like Weyerhaeuser paid like $4 million, and it used to be like $40 or $50 million. Is that for all of them combined, or is that just for each one?
No, that is for all of them combined. The money that we lost from private timber was at base $50 million a year. And the Oregon Forest Research Institute, which is the PR arm of the timber industry, actually sets the Harvest Severance privilege tax now. And they take that money to produce propaganda and commercials to tell you how great logging is for your water and your land and your fish. So that $4 million last year is what they used on advertising to point guilt away from them.
So that's not even peanuts for them. I mean, that's
correct.
That pocket change.
A lot of people are afraid that if we instate the Harvest Severance privilege tax, that the timber industry will pull up their trees and go somewhere else. But they're not going to do that. The Pacific Northwest is one of the biggest carbon sinks in the world. It's actually contains more carbon than the Amazon. And we grow trees well here, but the most important thing is to keep your trees in the ground as long as you can. And that's part of what the Harvest Severance bill construction contains, is that perhaps Harvest Severance will be lower for companies, corporations that intend to keep their trees in the ground longer than the 40 years, and that they could get a reduction in their Harvest Severance at the time of harvest if they keep their trees in a longer rotation. Something like 100 years would be nice. They don't, it doesn't really cost them anything. And you can see that California, Idaho, and Washington never quit logging, even with their Harvest Severance.
So what would those funds be used for?
Well, in the past, they went for public safety, they went for mental health, and they went to schools. And this is one of the reasons that Southwestern Oregon schools are closing and shutting down and cutting back. All over my district, I've been traveling around, and there are so many rundown closed schools, or even rundown schools that are still open. And part of the problem with this is that also the timber industry can influence your school by providing texts and field trips to show you how great Plantation really is, except they call it forestry. So we also provided some pretty good mental health in, I know in Douglas County in the 70s, we had an outstanding public health division and provided services to people of all ages. And I just really see that that's really fallen by the wayside in the last 30 years. Everything has become more privatized.
Joe asked us, are they paying the Harvest Severance tax now?
What the Harvest Severance tax that they are paying is whatever OFRI sets it at, whatever the Oregon Forest Research Institute sets it at. And that is just a few dollars so that they can produce their commercials. So what used to be 50 million was 4 million last year. And they set that among themselves.
So you're saying Oregon Forestry, the organization that's under scrutiny now for looking at how they've been spending their money, are the ones that decides how to tax the timber industry
Exactly.
on harvest?
Yes, they set their own Harvest Severance, but it all goes to the Oregon Forest Research Institute. And that institute is under investigation. It's being audited. And there is going to be a question asked is if they do provide any actual citizen support. They are a quasi-governmental organization. And so this is supposed to be government money that is funneled to them, but they set how much it is.
So isn't it kind of like an incestuous situation where they determine the tax and then they get all the money from it and they just get to pay themselves?
It comes out of one pocket and goes into the other, and it's all at their discretion.
Well, it looks like it's kind of a circular. They decide how much is taken out of the pocket of the timber industry that goes to them each year. Is that just so I'm clear on that? Yeah, and folks could share this information, that this live stream is going on. That would be helpful. Maybe get more people, looking at it and asking some questions. So what is it to reinstate the harvest tax? Can the state legislature do that?
Yes, they can.
So that it doesn't need a change in, it doesn't need to go to the voters or anything like that?
Well, part of it, if you tune in on the 21st, she can explain the entire history. But a lot of it has to do with Measure 5 and Measure 50, which I believe were voted on by the voters, but it was only like 25% of the electorate turned out because it was an off election year. And that played a big part in what the plan was, because the plan was for the timber industry to increase their property tax payments over time to replace the loss of Harvest Severance. But because of Measure 5 and Measure 50, it knocked them back to pre-96, I believe. And so they never went forward with the increasing the property tax.
And in my looking into property tax rates, Southern Oregon, at least a couple counties, Douglas, have one of the lowest property tax rate in the county, in the state, which also makes that problematic for services that those would provide. So they were never ever adjusted
and that's
here.
how it's increased our taxes to the poor. We're taxing the poor to death while giving the 1% a free ride. I think Douglas County has the third lowest taxes in the state, and Josephine County pays something like 58 cents per thousand. And if you are an elderly person and you live on your homestead land or your farm, every year they're increasing your taxes the minimum that they can, but every year that brings you closer to losing your home.
Well, and also by not having people who support this in office, like yourself, I mean, there's other, the climate change, the diesel, what was it? Is it a diesel fuel tax and cap and trade and all of that? These guys are all against that as well. The conservatives are.
It is,
that kind of all goes hand in hand.
That the biggest corporate entities supported cap and trade, because they would get paid to keep their trees in the ground longer, so they wouldn't have to cut them, and they would get more money for them. It was the smaller entities that were against cap and trade because they felt like it would hurt them for them to have to pay so much for their fuel for their log trucks.
Okay, so those are the timber unity guys, the smaller independents?
Correct.
Okay, all right, not the big corporations aren't part of that?
No, the big corporations were not against cap and trade.
So how far has this issue gone throughout the state of Oregon? I know I listened to a program about it, that an online Zoom meeting last week that was done up in Tillamook area. And so how much, you know, how many people know about this in the state? Do you have an idea how many people know about it in Senate District 1?
4 years ago, hardly anybody knew about it. And that was when I found out about it. And we started working with the economists that are investigating it. And then some environmental groups picked up on it. Jeff Golden has been looking into it, I believe, but he's not in District 1. I've just been spreading the word as best I can. But once people hear about it and they see the map, when you see the map, it's really impressive in person. A lot of people now know about it. 4 years down the road, we are really making progress. Like I say, that people are already working on constructing these bills so that we can get one to pass. And I definitely want to get there in time to do it, to vote on it.
So a comment and question from Sabrina. Says, hi there, schoolmate. You make me proud. Great minds continue to speak up and work for clean water and air. And this is, how do you differ from the other candidate?
How do I differ from the other candidate? Well, I get out in the communities. I spend time with people and I go to meetings. My opponent does not. My opponent basically goes to work and he goes home. I don't know where he gets his information. Quite frankly, I don't know that he has a message or a policy. I've never heard him speak about any policy that he has. So I have a lot of them. I have a very focused campaign, and I really don't know why anybody would vote for somebody who's basically invisible. Dallas has never been to any of the communities in this area, and I grew up here, and I have visited all of the communities in my area, and I visited the back roads and the creeks and the draws where people live, and Dallas has never done that. Dallas is really quite isolated from the actual public, as far as I can tell.
So are there any other questions or comments from folks?
Do we have anything from Facebook, or was that from Facebook?
Those, I think, from Facebook, yeah.
Or we can just hang out for a few minutes.
I got a question,
Yes, Daniel.
if I might. I was in the waiting room for a few minutes, so I'm sorry if I missed this. And if I did, please humor me and maybe go over it again. How is your proposal to reinstate a timber severance tax going to affect the availability now and in the future of jobs in the forest? A lot of what I hear, just living in rural timber communities, is people are really concerned about the disappearance of, I hate to call it a lifestyle, but people understand that phrase. People who feel like they're timber families and their parents and their grandparents have worked in the forest and they want their kids and their grandkids to live that way too. And I think that the timber lobby and the timber interests are very effective in harnessing people's fears about the disappearance of their lifestyles or the ability to live by working in the forest into the future. And they tend to have an almost like automatic, like sort of knee-jerk supportive response to anything they put out when they say, this is about timber jobs. So I'm curious how what you're talking about supports a future of timber jobs in the forest for people's kids and grandkids?
Well, one of the things about Harvest Severance, the bills that are being worked on, is that we will reduce Harvest Severance for people that will keep their plantations. And I want people to understand the difference between a forest and a plantation. We are talking about plantations, private timber, who controls how much cutting is done. So if they were to keep their trees in the ground longer, the only way to really get them to grow is to do pre-commercial thinning. So we can't get away with never cutting another tree. That's just crazy. We have to get out there and get some light down to those trees so that they can grow bigger diameters. We would produce timber jobs by reinstating the Harvest Severance with these modifications. And we're not ever not going to cut trees in southwestern Oregon because we grow trees really well. But I really want people to not use the word forest when you're describing a plantation, because they are a completely different animal. They look the same only from a bird's eye view. They do not look the same when you walk through them, if you can even walk through them. The whole practice of planting 10 trees for every one we took out was really stupid. It's a failed experiment. It isn't working for the health of our communities. And we need to get this stuff managed. We really need to manage the plantations. We don't need to manage our timber, our fire hardened forests. We need to manage private owned timber. They need to be responsible to the communities. It's their stuff that catches on fire and burns like crazy. That is why we saw the smoke that we had this year, because we're burning plantations. And that's never been done before on this scale. So there you've got firefighters. There's a lot of people who really like doing the firefighting. So we'll have firefighting jobs as well until we can get this really under control. So Harvest Severance will not eliminate timber jobs. It hasn't eliminated any timber jobs in California, Idaho, or Washington. It is not going to hurt the timber workers. And if they're being told by their employer that it will, I think they might be being lied to, because the sawmill owners do not have the same interests that you do. If you are a worker in a sawmill, your interests are not the same as the owner. Your interests are about not being automated out, by having a fair wage, by having decent benefits for your health care. Those are the kind of things that timber workers need to focus on, not on what the company is telling you. Otherwise, you're just a company union being managed by the company.
Okay, there's a question from Ashley Hicks, but it actually is more about, it's about addressing unhoused population with Douglas County and throughout our state. You know, what ideas do you have on addressing that? But I just want to make a comment that we're actually doing a affordable housing, homelessness and other service town hall on Sunday the 25th. And so there'll be folks who actually are in these fields from at least four of the counties that SD1 serves. But if you want to answer, you know, that briefly.
Well, you can say that we have a lot of job insecurity in southwestern Oregon, and not everybody that's homeless right now or before was homeless by choice. And if we had Harvest Severance, that's something that we could also focus on re-enriching our communities, getting people into homes. And I don't just mean tiny homes. We had the loss of 100 homes just here in Douglas County, and Talent and Phoenix, which aren't in my district, but those people are homeless too. Are we going to treat homeless different if it's caused by industrial fires? Or are we going to start to address the problem that so many people are just one paycheck away from being homeless? And that, in fact, in a couple of months, when all of the foreclosures start happening, you're going to have a great big growth in homeless. We let the banks get away with it in 2008, and now the causes aren't the same, but we need some kind of humanitarian plan to address what is going to happen in just a couple of months. We're likely facing a huge depression, and we need to start thinking about how we're going to construct a safety net. And if we have more support and more help from these foreign owners, foreign owners probably don't care too much about your homeless. So how are we going to turn this back into putting these lands back on the tax rolls? These lands used to be on the tax rolls and now they aren't. And this would help support our communities in addressing homeless and mental illness.
So Jana Roseland says, can you please speak more about what your priorities would be upon election?
No, my priorities upon election are to band together with these other senators and working groups and get this passed as soon as possible. It will address all of the issues that we have. We talk about 50 million a year was lost to the counties and the communities. But the fact of the matter is that was in 1990 dollars. So a Harvest Severance could really boost our economy. What if we used 20% went to the state so that they could address the PERS issue? What if we could use part of it for community health care? I think public health care has really been shorted, and that is something that we need, a place where people can walk in and get treatment today. If you have made up your mind that you're going to give up drugs, in Douglas County, you can't check into an inpatient place for 2 weeks. And by then, is that where your focus is? We need more reactive care. And this is something that we could use to address that. Education. We need to support our kids and we need to support our workers. If we don't have a good education system, we're cutting the bootstraps completely out. There are no bootstraps if we don't have good education. So there are multiple ways that we could use these tax dollars to address the issues that we have. I really think that we need to start thinking about what is Oregon going to do when we hit this recession or depression that's coming up very rapidly.
And Christian has a question about the severance. Would this affect the small business mills or logging companies? And who are you aiming the severance towards?
The severance is towards private timber. This does not address mills. And we would encourage people to not ship their logs overseas because that's what they do. If you don't know that China has a lot of mills that were built with American money or built with foreign investor money so that they can just scrape off 5 trees and ship them overseas and pay people 50 cents an hour. Those people live pretty well on 50 cents an hour though. And China has built a great economy on those 50-cent an hour jobs. But these people that own this land that are producing this timber, they don't mill it here. They don't manufacture it here. They're just like a parasite.
Rob Renzaglia, I hope I got that right. Are you pro-union?
I am very pro-union. I grew up in a mill working family. My father worked pushing logs on the pond for Roseburg Forest Products. My mother became the first female foreman for Roseburg Lumber in the plywood plant. And I worked there for 11 years. Both of my sisters worked there for, I think one of my sisters worked there for over 20 years. I left after 11 years to become a registered nurse. And I definitely saw a decline in the amount of representation by our local union. I feel like the unions have been undermined, and we need to get together and support our local unions. We need to build them back up. So I do support unions very much, very much. You're muted.
Yeah, I saw that. It warns me, hey, you're muted. But Rob also has another question, or I guess it's a question. You are offering government solutions. Is that consistent with voters in your district?
Government solutions. It may not be, I think that's a difficult question. I don't think anybody likes being hornswoggled. I don't think anybody likes being cheated. And I don't think anybody likes having corporations get special rights above the rights of the citizens. So I'm not sure what your question really means. I think that anybody who has a brain really can see that we are not being supported and we are being harmed financially by this tax structure and this corporate operation. And if you think for a minute that these people care about the citizens of my district, they don't. They don't care about the citizens of my district because they sit on their yacht and they drink wine and they go to parties and they don't care about where their money came from. They just invest and then they scrape that money off into their pockets.
Well, and it kind of sounds like what you said of the history of the elimination. There was actually a government solution for the rich timber industry's problem of paying taxes. So that was actually what, you know, what one might call, you know, corporate socialism, right? You know, as some of us like to refer to it. So, you know, so that's an interesting take on all of that. So can you help, Nael Dewey says, can you help restore a behavioral health unit that Mercy closed years ago?
You know, that's been one of my biggest problems was when we closed the mental health unit, because that's when you saw a whole lot of people out on the street. And I don't know if having them in the hospital is a long-term solution, but it certainly did create an immediacy of care, and people could check in when they were in crisis. So that is something that actually would have to be worked with the hospital itself. You know, they are a corporate entity too. Their money is based on shareholders. They are no longer a nonprofit. So if they don't see a profit in it, then they probably aren't going to go for it. They are supposed to be an entity that makes life better here, but sometimes I question if they do. So that is a difficult question, because perhaps we could do better with a private organization or a real nonprofit that would serve our community. But one of the biggest things that we need is federal support. We need to get federal support. And that means we need to have people with seniority at the federal level. So I think that's really important.
So let me see, there's Jill Latimer Sanders wants to know, this is not related to the subject, but I guess a few of these were not anyway. Curious about your views on mandatory vaccination for schools, especially preserving religious exemption.
this is a subject that is so appropriate right now. I really do not support mandatory vaccination. When I heard that that was going to be a possibility, I thought those people lost their minds. I would never administer a vaccination to somebody who didn't want it. There are too many factors. And right now, you have to wonder about if they came out with a vaccine before the election, how many Democrats would take it? How many anybody would take it? And that just turns it around to the people who wanted to institute mandatory vaccinations. We cannot trust big pharma to manufacture a product that won't harm us. And that is putting all of our faith in big pharma if we were to go to mandatory vaccinations. Nobody has the right to put anything in someone else's body without their permission. And as I understand it and think about it, the vaccination process is simply promoted to mothers as this is good for your child, or your child won't be able to go to school. But they aren't given any of the side effects or the handout from the box. Everybody just has got on this train that vaccinations are so good. But while I am a person who gives vaccinations, I give flu vaccinations. I'm currently in the middle of a big flu vaccination tour across the state. I allow anyone to refuse a vaccination. And I don't think they should be excluded from schools. I think that that was the whole purpose of vaccination back in the beginning, was that we would have herd immunity. And there are some children that shouldn't be injected. And I want to be real clear about that. I don't think everybody would want to take a vaccine for this virus in November.
Okay, Rob again, to follow up with his question about offering government solutions. You're asking government intervention to solve problems for the little guy. You're describing socialism. Will that be acceptable?
I don't know that I'm describing socialism at all. Not at all. I'm talking about what's fair. And these people having the privilege to operate here and to expose us to danger, wouldn't we like make them buy an insurance policy to operate in the state that would provide reimbursement to people who lost their homes due to the fires that are caused by their plantations? I'm not talking socialism. And I know I live in a community where people say taxation is theft. And I always say, taxation is not theft, taxation is community. A community decides how they are going to advance their culture and their welfare. And if these organizations don't want to contribute to the benefits of the communities where they operate, then perhaps we should take their corporationhood away from them. If they are superhuman, which is what they're considered when a corporation is formed, they are granted more permissions in their rights than regular human beings. And if they want to continue to operate here, they need to be a helpful part of the community. They should not be hurting the community. And in this case, they are. So no, I am not advancing socialism. I'm advancing community.
He says, by the way, he's impressed with your pro-union stance. Ashley Hicks has another question. How do you feel about improving the railroad infrastructure to accommodate private passenger transportation? And how would you fund it?
Well, oh my God, Ashley, yes, I really would love to see us have passenger service here. Several years ago, that was in one of the community development surveys. Basically, the only thing that this area lacks is passenger rail service. And I don't know how we would fund it. There are bonds and there are other methods, But that is something that I have always wanted to see, is passenger rail service. But it's a pretty big infrastructure leap. But I believe that Senator DeFazio is on the transportation committee, and that he has plans for that kind of stuff. So I think that we should pursue it that way, because we are going to need federal dollars. The coming depression, so I'm going to call it a depression because it's going to be, I think, like nothing we've ever seen. The only people that are going to benefit in the next few months is the 1%. Even our middle income people are going to be hurt. Everybody who was able to pay their mortgage and hasn't been able to pay their mortgage because of the shutdown. All of the people who haven't been able to return to work because of their own family illness, because there's a lot of people that aren't working because they have to take care of a family member that is ill. And I just think that we need a lot of help from the federal government, and that needs to be forthcoming. But I would love to see passenger rail. I would love that. Our tracks are too old and not the right gauge.
So any other questions? Is any from Facebook? I think we have them all.
I have a question.
There you go.
All right. If I can put it in the form of a question, give me a sec.
Do you just want to make a statement?
Just make a statement. Yeah.
Yeah,
Say whatever you want.
Well, no, I'm trying to figure out. Okay, earlier I asked about like the future of timber jobs, and it's kind of along those lines. Like the discourse, the public conversation around timber harvesting for the last at least 20 years, maybe 30 years, has been set up as a timber worker versus environmentalist fight, which has really allowed timber corporations to step into the role of advocating for timber workers against progressive liberal tree huggers, quote unquote. And I don't know, the last kind of big battle in all that involved things like protecting the spotted owl, the marbled murrelet, certain species of fish. And the solution, as I understand it, that we came up with in the 1990s was to put environmental protections on federally owned lands, which is a lot of the timberland in Josephine County. And that has allowed, I don't know, pro-timber interests to frame the question as, and to oversimplify a little bit, Democrats care more about owls than they do about your children. And that's been very effective. And so like the question I'm trying to make out of that is, how would changing timber severance taxation specifically and regulation of environmental, regulation of private timberlands more generally, can that actually address both labor and environmental concerns? Can it forge a common cause? Or is it just the next iteration of the worker versus wildlife wars, which I don't think are correctly framed, but it's certainly how the discussion has been proceeding for the last generation?
Was there a question?
That's exactly what I'm trying to say. I'm not sure quite how to put that as a question. Maybe, I guess.
I think we have to move forward with the harvest severance and the plans to keep the trees in the ground longer, which means removing some of the trees sooner. And many of these plantations are really inhospitable to certain types of wildlife, and especially with the amount of herbicide and pesticide sprays that are on them. So I think that we can benefit wildlife by putting restrictions on private timber. It isn't a lot of brain power to figure out that if we continue the way we're going and these people are allowed to operate unleashed, that we won't have any wildlife and we won't have any jobs because they're going to burn up and they're going to be cut and it'll all be gone. Are we going to continue to allow these people to abuse us? And that's what they are doing. They're laughing all the way to the bank. And not one of these red pieces of land provides jobs. Why do we allow them to stay and operate? And how can the timber workers benefit from these red lands? And that's where we put them to work with regulation. So I don't think it has to be wildlife versus timber workers. I think that it has to be timber workers versus the colonization of our state that benefits us not at all. These lands could provide jobs. These lands could provide a lot of jobs if we were managing them. And when you talk about managing the forest, these are the lands that need to be managed because they're not forests. Forests manage themselves, but plantations don't. And they just stick the trees out there and let them grow and spray them a little, and they never cut them, they never thin them. And what results is just a bunch of twigs. When you drive down I-5, you can see where they've cut back that 30-foot buffer, and you can see what a plantation looks like underneath. All that dry wood on the ground, all those dry sticks standing there with just little crowns at the top of green. They're very sparse. That's not healthy, and it's not good for Oregonians. That's kind of long-winded. I'm sorry.
There's another question from Ashley about how can you help us clean up and restore natural salmon species in the South Umpqua River?
Well, we need to quit dumping everything in the river. I have seen studies that show that clear-cut logging causes stream levels to rise for about 2 years. And after that, stream levels go down because those baby trees just suck up all the water out of the ground and they never release it. They do not respire. They do not put off water and attract rain. They don't do anything for our streams. And in fact, the silt and the runoff kills the eggs and destroys the spawning areas. So what we need is a better forestry plan. Now, you should know that there is going to be on our local ballot a question about whether we want to join Idaho. And this may seem a little far afield, but Idaho, as well as having a 3.5% Harvest Severance, they have much better buffers on their streams. They have much better Forest Practice Act, which is why so many of the industrial Wall Street forestry wants to be here, because ours are so lax. As a matter of fact, they're not even enforced. What little there is, they don't spend any time looking at what goes wrong. Now, Idaho is very, very, very strong on their Forest Practice Act and enforcing it. So if we end up with Idaho, it's not all bad. It will improve our fisheries, at least in the southern part of the state.
Gregory Offord wants to know about where you stand on the Second Amendment.
I am a very strong defender of the Second Amendment. I believe that the Constitution as written states it pretty clearly that we have the right to own guns. That's a right, and it's a God-given right. It is not something that the government can take away. And I believe that we have some pretty good practices already written, but there seems to be a real backlog on background checks, things like that. Um, so I am against most restrictions on guns. I think that many of the restrictions that have been brought forward in Oregon really affect people who are not rich. You can't afford a gun safe, or you can't afford the gun lock, and the punitive damages for not having your gun locked up. I grew up in Douglas County where everybody had a gun in a rack on the back window of their truck. And you had a gun because it's as important as a shovel out here in rural southwestern Oregon. So that's my opinion on the Second Amendment. I am a member of the Democratic Gun Owner Caucus of Oregon and a member of the Douglas County chapter of the Oregon Democratic Gun Owners. So I enjoy shooting. I'm not a hunter, but I have eaten plenty of game that was hunted when I was poor. I've certainly been the beneficiary of people who do hunt and people who enjoy taking me out to shoot. So that's my opinion on the Second Amendment.
Kiki Jones, when I graduated high school at the end of the 70s, the senior jobs in the mills paid about $20 per hour. Recently, I met a fellow working at the head millwright at a very small mill who only makes $20 today. Do you think there is anything that can be done at the state level that would help those wages keep up with inflation?
Absolutely, the buying power of the local timber workers has gone down. I took a cut in pay when I left Roseburg Forest Products Plant 1. I took a cut in pay when I went to work at Mercy. It was like half of what I was getting paid at the mill. So the mill did pay a very good wage. But since that time, as a nurse, my wage has increased 5 times, at least 500%. And I see that the people that work in the mill are still getting paid the same amount. Now, I don't know that the state can actually regulate what private operations are paying, but we certainly can work to make it safer for people to form a union that can stand up to the administration. And that was something that I saw when I left Roseburg Forest Products, that the union was not really very strong. They were really quite weak, and we were taking wage cuts. So I think that we need to be sure that we make it really safe for people to form unions and move forward in elevating their lives and their culture.
From Christian, he's asked, are you pro timber worker? There's a perception in this district seems to be if you criticize large timber corporation, that means you are anti-timber worker.
I come from a family of timber workers. I am not anti-timber workers. I support the workers. I do not support the process that keeps them in a state of semi-slavery. It's a boom and bust economy. And when things are good, they're really, really good. When prices are up, like they are right now for timber, then you're going to have a lot more jobs. But the first thing that a company does is cut the cost of labor when the price of their product goes down. So there is not any real supports for timber workers. And we need to work on getting them a real union that supports them and doesn't enact only the rights of the owners of the company, because the owners of the company are going to take every chance to enable automation if they possibly can. It doesn't matter how friendly you are with the owner. If he gets a chance to put a machine in your place, a machine that he doesn't have to pay wages or deal with at the grievance table, he's going to replace you.
Rob made a comment, I guess there's a question at the end of it. With all respect, you're asking for government help on many issues. I think this is where the country is falling apart. Big government has proven extremely positive in American history, and your laundry list of requests from government proves this fact. Why is it difficult for people to simply admit government has a profound place in working class life? Examples, unions, wages, healthcare, workplace safety, etc.
I sure don't know why people have a hard time with that. I said, um, taxation is not theft, taxation is community. And that's what our government is supposed to be supporting us with. And as it is right now, the state government gave away one of its greatest assets in 1990. And we really need to fix that. And I can only concentrate on my local issues because those are the things that I am familiar with and I experience. So I really want to focus there for now. I can't by myself bring federal money here. I can't by myself bring state money here, but I can help produce that entity that will allow us to thrive and flourish again. But it requires a decent government who actually is in touch with its people. And that's one of the things that I think that in Oregon, we have a real problem with the people that live in the cities up north understanding what our lifestyle is here. And they aren't getting a real clear picture of it from your current representative in Senate District 1. So I want to fix that. I can represent the people that live in Southwestern Oregon because even though I'm a Democrat, I am number one, first, a Southwestern Oregon resident for 65 years. I know the history and I do know some other things. So.
Martha raised the issue, I think, about regarding the South Umpqua River, the fish habitat, that there's also an issue with toxics from companies dumping toxic. And I think I remember just, the last year or so, there was a whole issue of something between with the water quality with the Winston district. And then, but there's also the pesticide runoff from farms. So.
Yes, the South Umpqua system is a disaster. And many people are appalled, say doctors or surgeons, when you tell them that my town gets its drinking water from the South Umpqua. Last year, we had a big problem with leachate from the county dump draining into the river. And it had been going on for years. And the DEQ set in to stop it. And we had a process set up, but they weren't following it. And they ended up dumping some very bad stuff into the water treatment plant. And we still don't know what the effects of that are. We won't know for years. If everybody downstream from Winston ends up with cancer, I guess we might be able to find out that it was that incident. And that was our county government. One of the issues with clear cuts, pesticides, silt runoff is that it clogs our municipal water treatment plants. So the taxpayers end up having to pay for repairs to the water treatment plant, and these guys never pay a thing to ameliorate that. They are continually destroying our soil up above, they're destroying our spawning beds, and they are spoiling our water. Nobody tests for herbicides, pesticides, and rodenticides at the municipal treatment plant. So the South Umpqua River has had a very bad 50 years, and it's only getting worse now that the price of logs is so high. People don't see what's happening up the South Umpqua River at the headwaters, where it's clear cut after clear cut after clear cut. It's very sad. And we really need to get a handle on these folks. We need to manage their plantations.
Are there any other questions or comments?
Could you talk about wilderness roadways? I go out into the wilderness fairly frequently, and there's a pretty good road network, although it isn't always maintained until it's logging time. But a lot of those roads are passable. Um, but I know that there is a piece of the wildfire discussion is wilderness roadways and access to remote spots for the purposes of fighting fire. Although it looks to me like a lot of that roadway is really about timber access. Could you talk more about that?
I'd be happy to talk about that. We don't need roadways into the wilderness. The wilderness, as it stands, is fire hardened. You don't have to fight fires in the wilderness. You need to fight fires on the plantations. Let's build more roads in the plantations. As it is, you can't walk through a plantation because they're planted so close together. We don't need more roads in the wilderness. We need more roads in the plantations. Somebody was telling me about a tree farm in Germany where the trees are all planted 8 to 12 feet apart so that the trucks and the tractors can drive between them. That's a real tree farm where the trees are expected to grow. We do not have tree farms that are in any way healthy. Every time you build a road into the wilderness, you give more access for invasive species, and you give more access to the destruction of the habitat of the creatures that live there. It's very important for certain birds to be able to nest on a branch, and it has to be protected by other trees. It can't be spread out, and it can't be jammed all together. Humans should let the forest manage the forest, but we need to deal with the plantations. I don't think we need roads into the wilderness at all.
So Ashley Hicks has another question that actually may relate to just a bigger issue of government functioning when people need their help or information. And we're kind of going to do that in another thing about government transparency and accountability. But this is, how would you help get the software updated so the growing backlog of sex offenders will be accurately registered?
Thank you for that question, Ashley. As I talked about in my stance on Second Amendment rights, we are supposed to be doing background checks, but there is a humongous log in the background checks. And the state computers absolutely are a problem. The fact that we weren't able to process unemployment benefits is just horrendous. I am not in the voter pamphlet. And the reason I'm not in the voter pamphlet is because I was waiting on something, and until the last 15 minutes, I was pretty sure that I could get my information loaded. I had everything ready. But in the last 15 minutes, the computer kicked us off 3 times. And it shut down like 2 minutes early. Everything went green, and we couldn't type anything in. Now, I was not the only one to encounter that. The Republican Party encountered that as well when they tried to submit their voter statement in the pamphlet. So the Secretary of State denied them to have their statement in there, and they sued the Secretary of State. Now that never occurred to me to sue the Secretary of State. I don't have that kind of money or resources, but they sued the Secretary of State, and even though they submitted their application something like 30 seconds late, they were allowed to be in the voter pamphlet, but I'm not. And that computer system that is operated by our state is just horrible. How can they still be operating on DOS? This is nuts. Oregon is broke, but our computer system and our software is broken worse. We don't have transparency. I don't know what's wrong down here at the county that we can't have video recordings of the meetings anymore. It's just crazy. How are we being cut off from our government because they can't maintain the software that allows us to interact with them? I think it's something that we really, really need to work on. Thank you for that question.
Any other questions or comments? All right, so maybe you can like wrap up why folks should vote for you. And then Christian can give some updates on what's going to be happening in the next week or so.
Okay, my wrap up. My wrap up is you should vote for me because I'm from Southwestern Oregon and I've been here and I have experience. I have worked in the mills and I have worked in the hospital and I have worked for the state in the homes of people that end up in their older years and just want to live in their homes and they can't really get care. I'm talking about veterans. We need to work harder on our Oregon Veteran Services, seeing that people are protected and have a good life, not a sad life. And I really want to bring back the bounty that I remember from the 70s when many of you who are out there voting this year, you weren't even alive in the 90s when this horrible downturn started. Just take my advice and vote for me because I always work and I will work for you. I won't work for the 1% or the Wall Street forestry. On to you, Christian.
All right. Thank you so much, Kat, for that. I wanted to let everybody know that tonight it will be 7 o'clock. There will be a text banking event to get out the vote for Kat Stone, as well as there will be a few more events as well. And those events will be on it looks like here, Wednesday, the 14th from 7 to 8:30, as well as the 15th, Thursday from 7 to 8:30, and Friday, the 16th from 7 to 8:30. Please check the links in the comment section in the Facebook link, and you will find all of the information to actually sign up and help us get out the vote for Kat today, because we definitely need it. Without a voter's pamphlet information, we have to work 10 times harder, and we really need your support today.
All right, thank you for joining us. In the next week, we're going to be talking education. And then the following week, Kat's going to be talking about housing, homelessness, and other services. And then the following Sunday, it'll be government accountability and transparency, as well as campaign finance reform. So share, let people know, and people can watch us anytime. It'll be on YouTube as well as Facebook. Thanks. Bye.